from the heart of the city too busy to hate. A progressive voice making too much sense for corporate media's comfort. This is The Ron Show, where we the people come first. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening. Weekdays, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or review podcast. Lots to cover today. Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock managed to bring legislation to the floor of the Senate, get it passed in the House and in the Senate, and became law without the President of the United States even signing it into law. Now, that's powerful. A bipartisan bill that addresses housing and housing affordability in this country. The President, who ran on affordability, seems to care not 1 ounce about housing affordability, however. Affordability at all now that he's president, honestly. But chose not to give that bipartisan bill his attention, let alone his signature. So history will show that President Donald Trump did nothing about housing affordability when given the opportunity and a consensus in Congress. Meanwhile, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock and his allies in both the Democratic Party and those who supported that legislation in the GOP stared the president down, waited it out, and it became law. We'll dive into that in just a little bit. First, I want to dive into some pretty explosive allegations about an upcoming Thursday night speech. The president choosing to address the nation on Thursday, and according to Times Now Digital last night, the first details of President Donald Trump's planned Thursday evening address have begun to emerge, with reports indicating the speech will focus on alleged foreign interference in the 2020 presidential election and could also include claims involving Georgia's 2 U.S. senators. Okay, that's not funny. According to MS Now, Trump is expected to use the speech to discuss newly declassified intelligence reports that the White House says reveal plans by foreign nations to interfere in the 2020 election. 2 White House officials speaking anonymously to discuss internal plans said the address will be based on the declassified intelligence. The exact contents of the speech have not yet been made public. However, the reported claims are expected to involve countries that U.S. intelligence officials have previously said sought to influence the 2020 election, including Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. We have invaded one and toppled the leader of that government. He is cooling in a federal penitentiary, if I remember correctly. The other, we are, I guess, the president said we're at war with now, so the 60-day clock is again started so that Congress has to figure out what to do with the War Powers Act. And we're sort of in a proxy war and have been for a while with Russia and Ukraine. Haven't talked much about Ukraine lately, have we? Although that's exactly where Senator Lindsey Graham was before he came back home and passed away over the weekend. Back to the Times Now report. On Monday, Trump previewed the address in a Truth Social post describing it as a speech to the nation scheduled for 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Later the same day, he told reporters the event was, quote, just going to be a speech like a lot of my speeches, meaning there'll be something on the teleprompter and you won't follow it. Yay. Back to this piece. Separately, the Washington Reporter, that's a journalistic entity, said a well-placed source in Georgia claimed Trump is planning to announce that Democratic Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock are illegitimate because of alleged fraud. The report said the announcement could come as soon as Thursday night. The White House has not publicly confirmed that claim. Trump has repeatedly claimed without evidence that he won the 2020 presidential election. Well, that garnered a response from Senator Jon Ossoff, who, by the way, is on the ballot this November, running against Mike Collins to reclaim that seat for 6 more years. Jon Ossoff writing on his Facebook page, Donald Trump's spiral continues. The failed president, pocketing billions as he drives up prices, is afraid to lose the midterm, so he will reheat debunked election conspiracy theories and tell bizarre new lies to deny his 2020 defeat and attack voting rights. This is a disaster for Trump puppet Mike Collins, already mired in scandal. Mike will now have to double down on conspiracy theories toxic in the general election. From the start, Trump's obsession with Georgia elections revealed his fury that black voters were instrumental in his defeat. I'm asking concerned citizens nationwide to join me and support our voter protection efforts in Georgia. Now, by the way, speaking of the former Senator Lindsey Graham passing away, Donald Trump took the opportunity on Sunday, grotesque, but, not even on the top 10 list of grossest things Donald Trump has done in the last 10 years, right? Grotesque, though, however, that while on Meet the Press and CNN with Jake Tapper on Sunday, Donald Trump took the opportunity to, again, try to use Lindsey Graham's passing as a way to promote the SAVE Act. Didn't want to talk about the situation in Iran, that it continues to spiral into a quagmire because there were, preset terms for these call-ins. He told both Kristen Welker and Jake Tapper that he didn't want to discuss that. Don't talk about that. That's not why you set up the phone call, blah, 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 which is kind of troublesome in and of itself, if you ask me. The DC media bubble, it's so incestuous. There should be, why is there anything on or off limits when you get the president of the United States on to talk to the American people? Whatever. Anyway, let me get to the part where he used the opportunity on both shows to promote his election suppression tactic, the Save America Act. In fact, it's encapsulated last night on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, who had some fun, I think in a tight-ropey, delicate way with the passing of Lindsey Graham. Anyway, listen to Donald Trump trying to promote his failed legislation on the back of the passing of Lindsey Graham.
He was pushing the Save America Act like crazy. This is a big blow to the Save America Act, let me tell you.
I mean, the body's not even cold yet, dude. And he's already out there using the passing of Lindsey Graham to try and revive his legislation that is stalled. Remember now, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock got his bill through the House and the Senate, passed with bipartisan support, and it's now law without Donald Trump's blessing, let alone its signature. But President Donald Trump doesn't seem to have the same amount of influence inside the Beltway that Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock does, which is why we have people talking about him, perhaps, with presidential aspirations in 2028. But also there's this, and Nicole Wallace on with former DHS Chief of Staff Miles Taylor yesterday, I think sort of encapsulates the head scratcher of this all. So let me get this right. When Obama was in charge in 2016, this is MAGA mind thought here. In 2016, when Obama was president and oversaw intelligence and, of course, the election, there was no Russian interference, no collusion. Russia, it's a hoax. In 2020, when Trump and his minions are in charge of intelligence and our election systems, there was widespread fraud. And then again in 2024, when Joe Biden, Democrat, was president and his folks were in charge of intelligence, again, perfect election. Donald Trump won the perfect elections that he wasn't in charge of and somehow lost the one that he was in charge of. Here's that conversation again. Nicole Wallace on MS Now with Miles Taylor, former DHS Chief of Staff.
But just riddle me this. When Obama ran intelligence, the election was secure and Donald Trump won in 2016. When Biden ran the government and the intelligence, the election was secure and Trump ran in 2024. But when Donald Trump and all of his boobs were running U.S. national security, it got all effed up. Is that the theory?
I guess so. Nicole, we like to say that this administration is built on lies, but it's also built on really bad leftovers, because these claims they are making are bad leftovers that have been sifted through years ago. They are moldy and inedible now. These claims that they're going to try to make later this week, I expect them to cherry pick and selectively leak intelligence about Chinese interference.
Can I stop you though? What document is going to show something that Donald Trump wouldn't have either stolen when he took, quote, national defense information to Mar-a-Lago in boxes that he then had flooded in the bay? Like, if he had it, are you sure it's going to be something that didn't exist? Like, what documents are we talking about?
Well, what they'll try to do is they'll try to mischaracterize shreds of information, but I think it will be easy to swat down. And I've got to agree with you, Nicole. I mean, I helped stand up Donald Trump's election protection efforts in the first administration with his director of national intelligence, with his handpicked director of the FBI, with my former colleague, Chris Krebs. And when it came to election time, those people who had access to all of that intelligence information, I was gone by that point, but people like Chris came out and said, we've seen it all, and this election was secure. Donald Trump didn't like that because he had cooked up this lie that it was stolen. And so he fired Chris. And of course, one of the first things he did when he came back into office was ordered a Justice Department probe into Chris.
Oh, did I mention that Miles Taylor was a former Trump DHS chief of staff? Oh, well, I guess that's an important detail that I probably should have mentioned, right? But I think that only makes this all more delicious. Back to Times Now Digital for a little bit of background here, just so that you're aware a little bit more of what actually did happen, what sort of investigation did occur after the 2020 election. In March 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, this is 2021, not Tulsi Gabbard time, 2021. Anyway, ODNI concluded that no foreign adversary altered or hacked any, quote, technical aspect of the 2020 voting and reporting process. The report stated that, unlike in 2016, there were no persistent Russian cyber efforts targeting election infrastructure. It did conclude that Russia spread misinformation aimed at, quote, denigrating President Joe Biden's candidacy and the Democratic Party, while Iran conducted a covert influence campaign intended to undermine Trump's re-election prospects. The ODNI also found that China concluded neither candidate was advantageous enough to justify direct election interference and instead relied on traditional influence efforts. More reporting on the alleged Thursday night primetime address Donald Trump is going to bring to the nation from Matthew Chapman. President Donald Trump gears up for a mysterious Thursday night announcement to the nation. A massive new election conspiracy theory stunt has been teased ahead of time by the conservative D.C. Reporter. Specifically, said the report, President Trump is planning to announce that Georgia's two senators, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, are illegitimate because of fraud. A well-placed source in Georgia tells us announcement could come as soon as tonight. This revelation, Chapman writes, which comes after years of Trump asserting with no evidence the 2020 election results in Georgia were rigged or otherwise invalid and trying to have them overturned through various legal and illegal methods, triggered reactions ranging from incredulity to outrage from commentators on social media. And while MAGA voices cheered it on, few others took it remotely seriously. This is insane, insane, all caps, wrote former Representative Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois. Record-breaking Ossoff and Warnock fundraising day coming, wrote Representative Maxwell Frost, Democrat of Florida. So a civil war instead of midterm elections, wrote Moms Demand Action founder Shannon Watts. This is a test run for 2026, wrote progressive talk radio host Dean Obeidallah. If Trump steals the 2026 election, ballots will not be enough to save us. It will take much more. The same Georgia election that elected Republicans statewide is somehow only fake when it elected Ossoff and Warnock, wrote Alex Cole of Newsities. LOL, well-placed source. Meanwhile, policy consultant Adam Cochran posted a comprehensive takedown of the entire thing. Doesn't work like that, he wrote. First off, there was no fraud, but you seized the ballots and the paper backups to make sure no one could question it. Second, the Constitution has no way to nullify a swearing in, only peer expulsion. Third, this sudden announcement is when Trump is down by two senators and desperate to pass a bill. Lastly, Trump had 64 court cases to try and litigate the election, including in Georgia, Cochran continued. No case turned up any evidence, including after an audit of these ballots. Trump's own lawyers and advocates then admitted to making up the conspiracy about this country and were charged for it. Part of the court evidence included their own email records of coming up with the plot. Even Eric Erickson is panning this. He tweets, Jon Ossoff is running for re-election this year in Georgia, and the president is rumored to be making an in-kind contribution to Ossoff's campaign. Now, since all that reaction, there was a bit of a response from the White House, who told the Washington Reporter, I've never heard of this outfit before. Anyway, they told the Washington Reporter, here's the update. The updated tweet that came, when was this? Last night around 8:30 p.m. Update, the White House tells us President Trump's speech will not focus on Georgia's 2020 elections. Georgia Republican source adds to us that they were notified of speech and the upcoming report's initial Georgia election focus in advance. Speech is set for 9 p.m. I don't really know what to make of that Georgia source. So I guess the Georgia source was incorrect in asserting that the Trump speech on Thursday night at 9 p.m. was going to be about Georgia's 2020 results, when in fact now the White House is insisting that that will not be the case. Here's the thing. You can write a Donald Trump speech all you want. Donald Trump doesn't stick to the teleprompter. He doesn't stick to the speech. He goes off script all the time, and all it takes is one little nugget of brain fart, and whoop, he's off onto that little tangent. I do believe it's going to come up, whether they want him to bring it up or not. They won't put it in the speech now. It'll come up anyway. It's The Ron Show. Georgia Now, Progressive Voice of you. Tune in or wherever you podcast. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on the passing of Lindsey Graham and the stuff that's coming out about him that I think a lot of us sort of already had heard before. But I do want to introduce you to progressive podcaster Keith Edwards, who I think really summed up a little bit of what I was trying to say yesterday from a similar perspective. He and I are both progressive, gay, white men who can sort of understand what it's like to have the pressure of being in the closet and the societal pressures to keep that a secret, yada, 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 and a little bit of just a shred of empathy for men like Lindsey Graham of a different generation, an older generation, who sort of felt like they were never in a position to come out, I guess. It's the damage he did while being that is so irksome. Here's exactly how Keith Edwards put it yesterday, and I don't know if I was nearly as eloquent, but I spent 44 minutes trying, and he did it in a matter of a few seconds, so that's why he's got millions of followers, and I'm, just here doing this with you.
Now, I'm going to say real fast, this is why I want to talk about this, because, listen, you might not know, I'm gay, been gay my whole life, been out since I was 16, okay? Now, I do have immense empathy for folks who feel like they could never come out, either because of societal pressure or because they are raised in such a way that they feel as though they're living some life of sin or shame. I get that. And I do have empathy for people who feel like they just can't come out. It's not safe for them, or they've been so brainwashed by their religion or by their parents that they'll never be able to live their truest self. Okay.
Right there with you.
I get that. But the thing that pisses me off is when you aren't out, you engage in your sexual desires, you use other people to fulfill your enjoyment, and then at the same time, you use the power that you've acquired by fitting the mold you think you need to be in order to obtain power, to use it to hurt the people who are bringing you pleasure. It doesn't sit right with me. And Lindsey Graham was no different, okay? This is just a little bit of Lindsey Graham's anti-LGBTQ plus record. In 1996, he voted for the Defense of Marriage Act as a member of the House. In 2010, he voted against the legislation that repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. In 2013, he voted against the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. In 2015, when the Supreme Court established nationwide marriage equality in its 2015 ruling, Graham said he would abide by the decision while making clear that he opposed it. And in 2022, very recently, Graham voted against the Respect for Marriage Act. The bill still passed the Senate in 61-36 with support from 12 Republicans. Not Lindsey Graham, though. And this is an ongoing problem, okay?
Yep.
This is just a few of the people on the right who are anti-LGBTQ+, and yet they be doing some gay on the side.
Right.
And then they get caught.
Yes.
Okay? And so I'm just like sick of this And so that's the main reason why I want to bring you stories like this. Because I don't care if you live the life of a hypocrite. I start to care when you live the life of a hypocrite, and then you use your power to attack the people who actually have the bravery and the audacity to live freely.
1,000% agree with that. That is exactly the thing that sort of angers me the most about an alleged closet case like Lindsey Graham using his position in power to do harm to those that he should be able to somehow relate with, to have some empathy with, to empathize with in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But he's also sort of the, I get to enjoy the fruits of privilege, and I'm going to use that privilege to punish those that I'm enjoying the fruits with, in a crass sort of way, I guess is one. But also those around Lindsey, those in his orbit, like his sister, who, by the way, is now going to take his seat, his office in the Senate for the remainder of his term. You don't think she knew? She knew. But so did his staff. So did even Senator John McCain, the late Senator John McCain. Folks in his orbit, in the GOP Senate caucus, the whole they all knew. They all know. They're not stupid. They just knew that in Lindsey, they had the surefire anti-LGBTQIA plus vote that they would need to keep the smoke off of their backs so that the bigots wouldn't be blasting them if there was someone in their midst, air quotes, who was actually pro-LGBTQIA plus, or even worse, gay. That's why with all the eulogizing that'll happen over the next few days or week or whatever, however long that this eulogizing goes on for the former senator from South Carolina, I think it's important to note, you can talk about his patriotism and his bravery and all this stuff, but to me, I actually felt sorry for Lindsey Graham, and I actually find the body of his existence to be kind of sad. And I don't use the word pathetic as a weaponized term, but I think it's kind of pathetic. As I said yesterday, by the age of 60, 65, 70, a year ago, already achieving all that he had in his political realm, he never once saw the opportunity to live his true self and to show an ounce of empathy to those he should be able to empathize with the most. Yeah, sorry, I can't respect that. It's The Ron Show on Georgia Now, Progressive Voice via TuneIn.
This is The Ron Show.
Heard weekdays 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn and wherever you podcast. Before I get to Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock's passage of a bill that limits private equity ownership in housing in the United States, as a residential realtor, can I tell you something? This is something that really just bugs the ever-loving pee out of me. When it comes to like private ownership of like rental properties, there are a lot of folks, just folks like you and me, who can form an LLC and buy a rental property and profit off of that rental property. I mean, that's what a landlord does, right? No big deal. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is when someone, whether it's a private investor or a big company or something like that, will buy a house, know from purchasing the house through disclosures, the age of the roof, the age of the HVAC. These are important things when you're buying a house. Like you want to know before you buy the house, well, how old is the roof? Because, it's a 20-year lifespan, right? 20, 25-year lifespan. With the HVAC, I'm about the same. And those are expensive to replace. So when you buy the house, whether you're a person, whether you are an investor who's going to rent it out and be a landlord, or you're a private equity firm, you would think you would know the age of the roof of the HVAC before you made that purchase. But then when you turn around and sell it and you provide no disclosures because there's actual legal cover for you to provide I don't know about the condition. I was just the landlord. I was just a private equity. Sorry, when you bought it, you knew. You should divulge on the way out too. I deal with this a lot of times because I'm dealing with first-time home buyers who are buying homes who are listed for sale from folks who were landlords or LLCs as landlords, or sometimes these private equity firms that are kind of getting out of the game. Zillow had to dump a ton of houses in the last few years because they got in over their heads. They were just overextended, and so they started peeling. But they were buying the houses knowing full well the condition of the house that they were buying, because what billion-dollar company wouldn't do their due diligence? But then turning around and either not keeping the paperwork, the filing, or just being indignant and using the legal cover to not have to disclose how old the roof, how old the HVAC is in the house. Here's the thing. If my client, let's just use for an example, I've got a client named Alex, wants to buy one of those houses, he's going to spend money on an inspection, $400 or $500 to inspect the house to determine the age of the roof or the HVAC, when that could have been disclosed before he spent the money on the inspection. Because what if he has then spent the money on the inspection and decides, yeah, that roof's too old, and they're not going to provide any money in return to help me, meet me in the middle even, to cover the expense of that roof replacement that's, a year or two down the road. Or the HVAC, it's on his last legs. They knew that, but they didn't disclose that. Well, now I spent $500 or so for an inspection, and now I know it, and I don't feel comfortable buying this house now, but I'm out $500. And then they move on. That Alex guy moves on to the next house to then do another inspection. And to me, it's just like, I think the only ones that benefit from this are the inspectors. And I guess the folks that are selling the house, who inevitably will get somebody who'll go, yeah, the roof. Okay, whatever. I'll deal with it down the road. But that's not steeped in reality. There aren't many buyers out there who will suck up that expense. I'm gonna reach out to a few of my friends who are state legislators, and I'm gonna say, this is something that we need to change on the books in the state of Georgia. And maybe I'll even dip it up to Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock, because he can seem to get common sense legislation passed. Anything that saves American people money, and also, by the way, doesn't cost any corporations, they just need to disclose. In real estate, we're implored to disclose. If we know, disclose. And in some cases, I think there are agents who will take the listing of an LLC or a landlord or a small corporate buyer, or I guess some of the larger corporate buyers, they probably have their own real estate, investor folks who have licenses who can post these listings. They just turn a blind eye. Well, we don't know. You do know. Somewhere down the road in the transaction chain from when you bought the house, you knew then, you know now. You just don't have to legally disclose because you're running under cover of an LLC or a corporate entity of some sort. That's another law that I'd like to change. Nonetheless, Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock managed to pass some vital legislation that prohibits mass quantities of homes being purchased and owned by private equity. It's one of the reasons why housing affordability has been just draining the pocketbooks of first-time home buyers and actually taking a lot of folks out of the game. The average age of a first-time home buyer right now, 40 years old. That's not young, just got out of college, got the first real job, just met the girl of your dreams and are ready to start a family. That's not 40. That's what, 28, 30, 40, y'all. We're that skewed now because private equity bought up a lot of homes and have been sitting on them 3, 5, 7, 8 years, 10 years or whatever to enrich themselves by being landlords and then turning around and spinning the houses that are, usually, a decade or so of being rented out. It's going to be in disrepair because the person who lives in it just doesn't care about it as much as someone who owns it if they owned it, by and large. And so then they, again, list without disclosing the condition that you would think know of, and then hope to find some unsuspecting buyer who will take the bait. Anyway, I say all that to say Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock gave a statement yesterday now that his bill became law, without the president's signature, by the way, which to me tells me that Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock is more influential in D.C. than the current president of the United States, and maybe he should run for president. Anyway, here is Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock in Atlanta yesterday addressing the passage of his bill into law after 10 days of waiting on the president's signature and then the Constitution just guaranteeing that it becomes law without a veto.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great day in the city of Atlanta, Mayor. It's good to be in Atlanta today as we celebrate the passing of this historic legislation that will benefit Georgians who are just looking to own their piece of the American dream. Housing is dignity. Housing is stability. Housing is hope. And so I'm glad to have Mayor Andre Dickens, City Council member Andrea Boone, who both grew up here, and Soulful Shears Barbershop owner Jacob Parcell, along with his son. Being in the Adamsville neighborhood fills me with immense pride. As I said, this is where our mayor is from. This is where the council member is from. Good things come out of these neighborhoods. But unfortunately, this neighborhood, like many across metro Atlanta and Georgia, has been plagued by large corporations swooping in and literally buying up hundreds, thousands of homes. I hear from Georgians like Jacob all the time about how hard, and you heard from him today, how hard it is to buy a home. Here is somebody doing all the things we tell folks to do, playing by the rules. He's a small business owner in our community, generating income for others' possibility, working every day. And still it's hard to buy a home. And so what's happening in metro Atlanta is happening in communities all across the state. Private equity firms and major corporations have bought up thousands of single-family homes, leaving Georgians without an opportunity. Let's be clear, if you're a single mom, if you're the married father of two trying to buy a home, owning a small barbershop, you cannot compete with Wall Street. They will outbid you every time. And so this is about fairness. And Atlanta, which we're proud of, Atlanta, the city of hope, is also ground zero for private equity's domination of the housing market, with more than 1 in 4 single-family rental homes, over 72,000 homes owned by large private equity investors. The home directly behind me is one of many across Georgia that have been bought up by large corporations and are no longer available for hardworking Georgians like Jacob who want to raise their children in a home. My message is very clear this morning. This home should be owned by a person and not a corporation. And so this has been going on a long time. It's past time for someone to do something about it. And that's why I'm proud to have written and negotiated legislation that will put a stop to this madness by banning private equity firms from mass purchasing single-family homes in communities like these and communities all across our state and our nation. This ban became law over the weekend as part of the largest bipartisan housing package in a generation. Yeah, you can clap, we're outside, but that's a good thing to celebrate. It is a step in the right direction, but there is still work that needs to be done. And so I understand personally the dignity and security that housing provides. I remember conversations that I overheard as a child between my parents who were trying to figure out how to buy a home. And so I remembered them. I thought of my dad. I thought of my mom. I thought of children like Jacob's son as I secured legislation to stop the spread of private equity from purchasing single-family homes. And we got this done even in a Republican-controlled Washington. I wrote the legislation, negotiated with my colleagues. I didn't get everything that I wanted, but I think we got some good things done here for Georgia and for Metro Atlanta. When you set politics aside and center the people, you have a chance at getting the public policy right. I promised the people of Georgia that I would walk with them even as I work for them. And so it's good to be walking through this neighborhood today and to think that over the weekend we were actually able to bring some good news.
Again, without the assistance of the President of the United States, who ran on housing affordability, right? He ran on affordability, period, and decided not to take action when it was sitting on his desk. So from CBS News, Zachary Bynum reporting, one of Senator Raphael Warnock's highest profile housing proposals has officially become federal law, marking a significant policy change aimed at slowing corporate ownership of single-family homes in Georgia and across the country. Warnock announced Saturday that his provision prohibiting large private equity firms from purchasing additional single-family homes took effect after the broader bipartisan housing package became law without President Donald Trump's signature. Under the Constitution, legislation passed by Congress can become law if the president neither signs nor vetoes it within the required 10-day window while Congress remains in session. The provision is included in the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, which lawmakers have described as the most significant federal housing reform package in decades. The legislation also includes measures intended to increase housing supply, modernize the appraisal process, oh boy, waiting for that, expand rural housing programs, and encourage local governments to build more housing. The new law follows years of growing concern over the role institutional investors have played in Georgia's housing market, and I will add throughout the country as well. More than 1 in 4 single-family rental homes in Metro Atlanta, according to CBS Atlanta, are owned by large corporate investors. More than 72,000 homes, giving the region one of the highest concentrations of institutional ownership anywhere in the United States. Housing advocates have argued that those companies can outbid families with cash offers, reducing the number of homes available to first-time home buyers while contributing to higher home prices and rents. Warnock has repeatedly cited those trends in pushing the legislation, saying corporate investors have increasingly treated homes as financial assets instead of places for families to live. In addition to limiting future purchases by private equity firms, the housing package includes provisions designed to incentivize local governments and financial institutions to build more housing, reduce regulatory barriers, provide grants and forgivable loans for home repairs and weatherization, and reform several longstanding federal housing programs. Legislation also incorporates Warnock's Appraisal Modernization Act, which supporters say is intended to improve fairness in the home appraisal process. You know what? I should reach out to the Reverend Senator's office and talk to him about my disclosure beef that I began this segment with, because I think that's something that, again, if you want to save a first-time home buyer some money, it is one of those closing costs that makes homeownership sort of prohibitive to a lot of folks. It gives folks pause to say, wait a minute, I need to put a 1% earnest deposit down on the house. You're going to have to provide 3 to 3.5% anyway, unless you can find a lender who does some zero down. There are some zero down payment options out there, but you still have to expend money on the inspection. I mean, that's $500 right there, $300 to $500, depending on, you know, how much the appraisal is or how big the house you're buying is. $300 to $500 just out of the budget right then and there. With the economy being what it is and gas prices again creeping up thanks to this new war with Iran that has been renewed for another 60 days. Anyway, that $500 expense, it sometimes is a little cost prohibitive. It's not something that people just have standing by. The 1% earnest deposit and that kind of expense and the appraisal fee that a lot of lenders charge up front. I mean, the idea is to make the road to home ownership attainable and not to, for 60, 90, 120 days, hamstring economically a family that in this country is obviously, for most of us, living paycheck to paycheck. Anyway, I'm off on my tangent again. Sorry about that. Back to the CBS Atlanta report. The law's long-term impact on Georgia housing market remains to be seen, but housing affordability continues to be a growing concern across Metro Atlanta, where rising prices and limited inventory have made homeownership increasingly difficult for many families. The legislation represents one of the most significant federal efforts in years to address the influence of institutional investors in the nation's single-family housing market. When we talked last week about the prospects of Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock potentially kicking the tires on the 2028 presidential campaign, you can put this legislation right there with his insulin capped expense legislation. What was it, $35? I mean, you can't find, I don't think, a 2028 candidate on either side of the aisle who's going to be able to run with the bona fides of addressing affordability the way Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock has. It's The Ron Show on Georgia Now, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. As we get closer to the November election, there'll be a lot more conversating to have about the key races here in Georgia, gubernatorial election being one of them. Greg Bluestein wrote a piece day before yesterday in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Speaking of Keisha Lance Bottoms and her race for governor, which would be historic because Georgia's never had a black governor. Georgia's never had a female governor. And Georgia, of course, has never had a black female governor as well. But Keisha Lance Bottoms is running for the office where she could check off both societal boxes, but doesn't really seem to be paying a whole lot of attention to that. Bluestein writing that Keisha Lance Bottoms is trying to do something no black woman has ever done, win a governor's race. A black person even, if you want me to speak that into existence too, Greg. But the former Atlanta mayor isn't making that historic milestone a centerpiece of her campaign for Georgia's top job. Bottoms readily shares her family story, how her ancestors were enslaved on a plantation in East Georgia, and her mother opened a beauty parlor to support the family, while her father, a famous soul singer, spent time in prison on drug charges. To me, this is me talking, not Greg. To me, that's subtle. It's there, but it's not in word. Still, Bluestein writes, she says voters are far more interested in everyday concerns, like the price of groceries, public safety, and access to health care, than the history she could make if she defeats Republican Rick Jackson in November. Obviously, the historical context to it could be significant, but when I'm talking to voters across the state, they're concerned about how a leader will deliver for their communities, Bottoms said. The question of whether it would be a woman, a black woman, doesn't come up. It's just about how will you make my life better? The approach, Bluestein writes, also marks a contrast with Stacey Abrams, the party's last nominee for governor, who made the case that race and gender were inextricably linked to politics. Stacey wasn't wrong, but the thought, I guess, is that some people bristle at it even coming up. Oh, you get this all the time, right, on social media. Oh, there you go again, playing the race card. No, your side plays the race card. In fact, the dog whistle, if you will. Anyway, new, vibrant, noisy voices represent the strongest tool to manage the growing pains of multicultural coexistence, she wrote in foreign affairs after her 2018 bid, Stacey Abrams did. By embracing identity and its prickly, uncomfortable contours, Americans will become more likely to grow as one. But Abrams campaigned in a different political environment. Since the 2024 election, many party strategists have argued the party should de-emphasize identity-based appeals and focused on kitchen table issues. Affordability has become the dominant message for both parties this cycle. Can I just also say, by the way, I kind of understand where some of the party strategists are coming from in that, let me just give you my anecdote. From campaigning as heavily as I did in 2016 in South Carolina for Bernie Sanders when he was running for president, we could not get black voters, many of them anyway, to even crack the door to listen to the conversation. There was always, well, what does he say about black issues? Where is he on, what are his positions on black issues? And I know this comes off as tone deaf, and I apologize from the white progressive guy. I think affordability are issues for all people. Alan Holmes is someone I follow on the Twitter X platform, and he and I debate, frequently about, for example, he has a central issue that he is just doggedly persistent on: reparations. But I happen to argue that de-emphasizing a conversation on reparations in an era where we've seen how voters react to, or the demonization of DEI example, for example, can or the Democrats being portrayed as being too reliant on things like DEI or discussing it's a wedge issue. It's a weaponized issue that I think too many independents are moved by against the grain for Democrats to bring up. I'd never argue the merits of it. I would say that sometimes it's about checking the temperature, reading the room, and knowing when it's a good time to bring something up and when it's not a good time to bring something up. And I know that's a hard sell. That's a hard message to hear for people who have been wronged historically, systemically, even in codified manner for more than a century and a half after the Civil War. What I think we're seeing from the Keisha Lance Bottoms campaign and from Democrats writ large is an ability to discuss issues that resonate with black voters without necessarily labeling them as black issues. Back to Bluestein, who writes, veteran political consultant Saba Long said, Bottoms is making a calculated decision this cycle that, quote, relatability beats representation. Voters asked two questions. What's in it for me? And can I trust this person? Said Long, adding that Bottoms is addressing both by sharing her life story and, quote, telling voters what will be different in their lives if she wins. And this is where I'll give the Bottoms campaign some credit. I don't think she necessarily needs to. Everybody knows who needs to know that Keisha is a black woman. And her biographical nuggets weaved into her campaigning and her social media sort of tell the story. And I think to black voters also indicates that she's telling them, I know what you're going through because I come from what you're going through. My family's experienced what you're going through. I'm here to listen to what you're going through, and I will work to address the issues that exacerbate what you're going through. One of the things that I had an issue with the Abrams campaign both times was that I felt like she honestly leaned in a little too much on the cultural aspect. I mean, her fundraisers always had a very hip-hop centric tone. It's the same reason why I think a lot of folks are just uncomfortable going to Atlanta Falcons games. Atlanta Falcons lean in a lot. And I get it. You're in Atlanta. It's the culture of the city. But you're not just the Atlanta Falcons. You're the Georgia NFL franchise. And there's more to Georgia than inside 285. By the way, Keisha Lance Bottoms a huge Atlanta Falcons fan. Anyway, I just found this all noteworthy. I'm going to share the Bluestein piece in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. The notable difference from the Abrams campaign to the way the Bottoms campaign is obviously weaving her past and her culture into the sales pitch without being overt about it. That'll do it for The Ron Show, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. on Georgia Now, 11 p.m. Progressive Voice via TuneIn, wherever you podcast. Show notes as always at ronshowatl.com. Take care.